The night was calm outside Los Angeles, but inside Sandra Bullock's heart, a storm was building. She sat alone in her living room, staring at an old photograph of herself and Keanu Reeves on a movie set years ago. The photo had always made her smile, but tonight it stirred something deeper, something she had kept hidden for too long. The hook began when her phone buzzed with a message from a charity coordinator. Keanu just donated again, quietly, without his name attached. Sandra's chest tightened. She knew his quiet kindness. She knew the way he gave without asking for credit. That was one of the reasons she had fallen for him long ago, though she had never dared to confess. The scene cut to Keanu in a dim kitchen, sleeves rolled up, preparing a late meal for a tired neighbor whose husband was sick. His movements were calm, deliberate, like a man who understood the weight of small acts. Outside, rain started to fall, a soft, persistent reminder of time slipping away. Their lives had crossed many times, film sets, charity events, quiet dinners with friends. Always there was respect, humility, and a shared sense of resilience. But the world had never known the hidden glances, the unspoken promises. Sandra remembered the night years ago when she was nervous before an award show, and Keanu had whispered, "You're stronger than you think. Just breathe." She had held on to that line like a lifeline through storms of doubt. As the story unfolded, the camera followed Sandra driving through the quiet city streets. Headlights reflected off wet pavement as suspense built. She was on her way to a private charity gala where Keanu would be. Tonight, she had promised herself, she would finally tell him. But a sudden call from a young fan changed her route. The fan, a teenage girl named Lily, had been inspired by Sandra's resilience after a personal loss. Lily's voice trembled as she explained her family's struggle. Without hesitation, Sandra turned her car toward a small community center where Lily waited. This was a moment of kindness the audience could feel. A star taking time for someone unnoticed by the world. Sandra listened, comforted her, and quietly promised to help. The scene lingered on Lily's tearful, hopeful smile. Meanwhile, Keanu arrived at the gala early. He was greeted with applause but stayed humble, helping stagehands adjust lights and quietly carrying extra chairs for late guests. A reporter tried to press him for headlines about his success, but he deflected, praising the volunteers instead. The suspense deepened. Would Sandra arrive? Would she speak her truth? As the night stretched on, Sandra finally stepped into the bright hall. Her dress was simple yet elegant, her hair damp from the rain. Her eyes scanned the room until they found him. Their shared glance was enough to silence the noise of the world. The camera lingered on their quiet recognition, two souls connected by years of unspoken understanding. But before she could approach him, the power suddenly flickered and went out. Gasps filled the room. An unexpected storm had knocked out electricity across the city. In the darkness, someone panicked. A child had tripped near a stairwell. Keanu's voice cut through the confusion, calm and steady, guiding people to safety with nothing but a flashlight from his pocket. Sandra helped, her voice soft but firm, reassuring frightened guests. When the lights returned, they found themselves standing side by side, breathless and a little wet from the leaking roof. Keanu turned to her, his quiet smile saying more than words. She almost spoke then, but a young volunteer rushed up thanking Keanu for saving the child. The moment slipped away again. As guests slowly left, Sandra remained behind, watching Keanu stack chairs and check on staff. Humility wrapped around him like a second skin. She realized it wasn't just his kindness that drew her. It was his quiet strength, his ability to make people feel safe even in chaos. The final shots of this part linger on Sandra driving home, her heart pounding. Her hands tighten on the steering wheel as she whispers to herself, "Next time I won't wait." Outside, the storm eased, but inside her chest, a deeper storm was still waiting for release. The camera fades to black, leaving viewers with the question, Will she confess before it's too late? The morning after the storm felt strangely bright, as if the city itself had been washed clean. Sandra Bullock stood by her kitchen window, holding a warm mug between her hands. The photograph of her and Keanu still sat on the counter, edges worn from years of quiet longing. She whispered to herself, almost as if rehearsing, "I have to tell him." But even as she said it, her stomach twisted with doubt. Across town, Keanu Reeves was on a motorcycle ride through the hills, the wind teasing the edge of his jacket. The night before still played in his mind. The moment the lights came back on, the way Sandra's eyes had locked with his in the middle of chaos. He had felt something stir, a fragile hope he had kept buried for years. But Keanu had always been cautious with hearts, especially hers. He wondered if she had felt it too, or if it was just another fleeting brush with destiny, a unique hook pulled viewers in. While Sandra stood lost in thought, her phone rang again. It was Lily, the teenage fan she had met the night before. Her voice was urgent but hopeful. "Miss Bullock, you won't believe this. Keanu called my mom this morning. He offered to pay for my brother's school supplies." Sandra froze, her breath catching. Keanu hadn't mentioned it. He hadn't done it for praise. The audience could almost feel the weight of his silent generosity, the kind that leaves an ache in your chest. Sandra promised Lily she'd check in soon, then grabbed her keys. She wasn't sure where she was driving, only that she needed air. The city stretched out before her, alive and humming. Yet somehow she felt like she was the only person awake. As she drove, memories came flooding back. Years ago, on a film set, Keanu had stayed behind after a long day to help a tired crew member fix a broken light. Another time, he had quietly donated to an extra's medical bills without anyone knowing. She had fallen for him piece by piece, in small, unremarkable moments that revealed his soul. Keanu, meanwhile, stopped by a small diner for breakfast. He slid into a corner booth, unnoticed by most patrons. But an elderly waitress recognized him quietly and thanked him for a donation to her granddaughter's music program. Keanu smiled shyly and asked how the girl's recital went. The scene shifted to her describing the recital with tears in her eyes. The audience felt the tug of respect and humility. The way fame hadn't touched the core of who he was. Then a twist. Sandra's car radio reported heavy flooding in a nearby district, one where a community center was at risk. Volunteers were scrambling to move supplies. Without thinking, Sandra turned her car in that direction. She arrived to find chaos, families packing boxes, children clutching stuffed animals. And there, already knee-deep in work, was Keanu, sleeves rolled up, passing crates of bottled water. She watched him for a moment before stepping in. Together, they worked silently, passing supplies hand to hand. Every glance they shared was charged with unspoken history. A sudden shout broke the rhythm. A crate slipped, water bottles rolling into muddy water. A young boy ran after them, nearly slipping on the wet ground. Keanu lunged, catching the boy just in time. Sandra's heart leapt. The boy's mother cried, hugging her son. Keanu brushed it off, simply saying, "It's okay. We all look out for each other." As the sun dipped behind clouds, the two found themselves taking a brief break under a leaking awning. Rain dripped steadily from the edges, forming small puddles around their shoes. Sandra's hair clung to her face, her dress soaked at the hem. Keanu handed her a bottle of water, their fingers brushing. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. She almost spoke then, but a volunteer interrupted, needing help with the last truck. They both returned to work, the moment slipping again. But the audience could sense something building, a pressure like thunder waiting behind distant hills. Later that evening, Sandra drove Keanu home since his motorcycle was trapped behind the floodwater. The city lights blurred past the windshield, their reflections stretching like memories across the wet glass. Silence filled the car at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people know too much about each other to fill the space with small talk. Finally, Sandra spoke. her voice soft. "You always show up when people need you." Keanu glanced at her, his quiet smile flickering in the dim light. "So do you," he replied. She wanted to tell him everything, that she had loved him quietly through years of laughter and heartbreak, that his kindness had kept her believing in good things. But she swallowed the words, afraid of what speaking them might change. As they neared his home, the tension thickened. Viewers could feel the suspense. Would she confess now? Would he? But before she could gather her courage, her phone buzzed, a message from her agent about an urgent meeting. The timing felt cruel. She dropped him off, their eyes holding for a second too long before he stepped out into the rain. As Keanu watched her taillights fade, he whispered to himself, "Don't wait forever." The camera lingered on his face, hopeful yet uncertain, before fading to black. The world outside was calm again, but inside their hearts, the storm had only grown stronger. The following day began with a golden sunrise spilling across Los Angeles, a fragile calm after nights of rain and restless hearts. Sandra Bullock woke early, her mind replaying the sight of Keanu Reeves standing in the floodwater, sleeves rolled, hands steady. She pressed a palm to her chest, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat quicken at the memory. Outside, birdsong felt louder than usual, like the world itself was urging her forward. But the morning's peace didn't last long. Her agent's message from the night before weighed on her, a major studio meeting, a high-pressure decision about a new film deal. She dressed quickly, brushed her hair, and slid on sunglasses, trying to mask the exhaustion under her eyes. Driving through the city, she couldn't stop glancing at her phone, half hoping for a message from Keanu. There was nothing. Across town, Keanu sat quietly at his kitchen table, reading a small notebook filled with handwritten quotes. One line stood out. "Sometimes the longest journeys are across a single room." He thought about Sandra, about the way her eyes had locked with his after he rescued the boy. He wondered if she would speak to him today, if fate would finally stop teasing them. Then came the first hook of the day. Sandra's car radio announced breaking news. Another storm front was moving in, and a charity event they were both scheduled to attend might be disrupted. The anchor mentioned that the event, planned for an old theater downtown, was to raise funds for families displaced by the flood. For Sandra, it wasn't just another obligation. This was the stage on which she had quietly decided she would confess. At the studio meeting, producers praised her professionalism, but pressed her to take a demanding role that would require months away from Los Angeles. The tension tightened. If she left, the fragile thread between her and Keanu might snap forever. She nodded politely, but inside conflict brewed. Career or heart, safety or risk. Meanwhile, Keanu stopped by the flooded district again, bringing fresh supplies. Children ran up to hug him. A grandmother handed him a small paper star, saying, "You bring light, even in storms." He tucked the star into his pocket, unaware that a photographer had quietly snapped a photo of him. Later, that photo would circulate online, sparking whispers about his quiet heroism. By afternoon, Sandra sat in her car outside the downtown theater, staring at the entrance. Memories of her early acting days came flooding back. She had performed on that very stage once, a nervous newcomer terrified of failing. Now she was terrified of something else entirely, speaking her heart. Inside the theater, volunteers bustled about, stringing lights and arranging chairs. Keanu arrived early again, dressed simply in jeans and a dark jacket. He didn't notice the small paper star fall from his pocket onto the stage floor. A young stagehand picked it up, curious about its origin. When Sandra walked in, their eyes met across the dimly lit hall. It was as if the world paused. But before they could approach each other, the event organizer rushed over to Sandra, pulling her aside to address a sudden issue with the sound system. Another volunteer asked Keanu to help with a stubborn projector. Suspense tightened its grip. Two people who belonged side by side kept being pulled apart by circumstance. As the evening began, guests filled the theater. Soft music played, and the smell of coffee and rain filled the air. Sandra took her seat near the stage, her hands clasped tightly. A guest speaker began sharing stories of families affected by the floods. One story, about a little girl who had lost her only photo album, brought tears to Sandra's eyes. She glanced at Keanu across the room and saw him discreetly wipe his own eyes. A sudden clap of thunder outside caused the lights to flicker. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The projector malfunctioned, and the main presentation froze mid-slide. The organizer panicked, whispering to a colleague. Keanu stepped forward calmly, offering to troubleshoot. He knelt by the projector, his hand steady even as thunder rumbled. Sandra rose quietly and joined him, holding a flashlight so he could see. Their shoulders brushed as they worked. In that shared light, their faces were close enough for her to see the rain glisten in his hair. She whispered, almost without thinking. "You always know what to do when things go wrong." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "So do you," he replied softly. They fixed the projector and applause followed. But as they returned to their seats, a small child from the audience toddled onto the stage, holding up the paper star. "Someone dropped this," the child said innocently. Keanu recognized it instantly. The audience chuckled warmly, unaware of its quiet significance. Keanu took it gently, thanked the child, and glanced at Sandra. She smiled faintly, a silent acknowledgement of the universe's subtle push. The event resumed, but the storm outside worsened. Rain lashed against the windows and wind howled through the old theater's cracks. A sudden power surge cut the lights completely. Darkness swallowed the room. A few guests gasped. Someone stumbled. Sandra's hand reached out instinctively and found Keanu's. His fingers closed around hers firmly. In the darkness, their whispered voices carried weight. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am," she breathed. "As long as you're here." Emergency lights flickered on moments later, casting a dim glow. Their hands parted reluctantly as volunteers reassured the crowd. When the main power returned, the rest of the event passed smoothly, but neither of them heard a word. They kept glancing at each other, their unspoken feelings growing heavier by the minute. As the night ended, guests trickled out, thanking them for their help. Sandra lingered near the exit, hoping Keanu would approach. But just as he started toward her, a group of fans intercepted him for photos. By the time he looked up, she was gone, slipping quietly into the rainy night. The camera followed her car as she drove through slick streets, her heart aching with missed opportunity. She whispered to herself, "I can't keep running from this." The scene cut to Keanu standing alone outside the theater, the paper star in his hand, staring at the rain. He whispered, "Don't let me be too late." The tension lingered as the screen faded to black, leaving viewers breathless and desperate for what would come next. The storm had passed overnight, leaving Los Angeles wrapped in a soft morning haze. Water pooled in gutters and the city smelled of wet asphalt and fresh beginnings. Sandra Bullock awoke with a restless heart. She could still feel the ghost of Keanu's hand in hers from the blackout, that fleeting touch that had steadied her even as the world went dark. She lay in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, knowing she could not let another opportunity slip away. Across town, Keanu Reeves stood on his balcony, the paper star between his fingers. The city stretched out beneath him, bright but fragile, like a photograph exposed to too much light. He thought of her smile under the emergency lights, how her whispered words had calmed him as much as he had calmed her. His chest ached with quiet longing, but old fears whispered in the back of his mind. What if confessing ruined the friendship they had carefully guarded for years? By mid-morning, a unique hook pulled the audience in. Social media was ablaze with a grainy photo from the charity event. A fan had captured the moment their hands brushed in the dark. Comments flooded in, speculating about a hidden romance. Headlines read, "Hollywood's quietest love story." Sandra's phone buzzed with messages from friends teasing her gently. One message from Lily simply said, "You two give people hope." Sandra smiled at that, but also felt the weight of expectation. She needed clarity, not rumor. She decided she would find Keanu today. Keanu, meanwhile, received a call from an old friend, a former stunt coordinator now running a small rescue team in the flooded district. The team had lost essential equipment overnight, and children were waiting for supplies. Without hesitation, Keanu loaded his truck with blankets and food. As he drove, he passed billboards for his films, their bright colors a stark contrast to the quiet, real-world heroics he preferred. Sandra arrived at the same district an hour later, having had the same thought. She had stopped at a supermarket, filling her trunk with food and bottled water. When she saw Keanu's truck already there, her breath caught. The camera zoomed in as their eyes met across the muddy parking lot. A small crowd of volunteers bustled around them, but for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just two people. Sandra approached, her heart hammering. "You beat me here," she said softly. "You always find a way to show up," he replied, his voice warm but tinged with something deeper. They worked side by side again, passing crates and comforting families. A young boy clung to Sandra's leg, thanking her for the food. She knelt to hug him, tears pricking her eyes. Keanu watched quietly, the sight filling him with admiration. Then came an unexpected twist. A volunteer shouted that a bridge on the main road had partially collapsed, stranding a small group of families. The rescue team hesitated. The remaining path was slick with mud and dangerously narrow. Keanu grabbed a rope without a second thought. "I'll go," he said. Sandra stepped forward. "You're not going alone." The audience could feel the suspense tighten as the two of them made their way along the muddy trail. Rain clouds gathered again, a soft drizzle falling. They found the families, a mother clutching a baby, two elderly men, and a frightened little girl. Keanu reassured them calmly, securing the rope for the return path. Sandra held the baby so the mother could steady herself. Midway back, the little girl slipped, her foot sinking into a patch of slick mud. Keanu caught her arm, but the movement caused him to lose his own footing for a split second. Sandra's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve, their eyes locking as adrenaline surged. The audience could almost hear their unspoken promise. "I won't let you fall." Once safely back, cheers erupted from the volunteers. The rescued families hugged them both, thanking them through tears. Sandra handed the baby back to its mother, her heart pounding. Keanu's quiet smile met hers, a smile that carried 1,000 words neither had spoken. Later, as the sun broke through the clouds, they sat on the tailgate of Keanu's truck, boots muddy and clothes damp. Children played in the distance, their laughter a balm after the tension. "You always risk yourself for others," Sandra said softly. "And you always follow," he replied, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. She wanted to confess then, but the moment was delicate, like glass on the edge of breaking. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos. "I made coffee," she said with a small laugh. He accepted it, their fingers brushing again. As they sipped, a rainbow arced faintly across the sky, a quiet reminder that storms can leave beauty in their wake. The camera lingered on their profiles, lit by soft sunlight, the world around them blurred. Before leaving, Keanu handed her the paper star. "Hold on to this for me," he said. She nodded, tucking it carefully into her pocket, her heart swelling with something too large to name. As they parted ways, the audience was left with a sense of mounting inevitability. Two hearts circling closer, each moment weighted with meaning, each glance carrying the promise of something extraordinary. That night, Sandra lay in bed again, the paper star resting on her nightstand. She whispered into the quiet room, "Next time, I will tell him." Meanwhile, Keanu sat by his window, city lights twinkling like distant constellations. He whispered to the empty room, "Don't let fear win." The screen faded to black, the suspense almost unbearable, promising that the next chapter would bring hearts even closer to the edge of truth. The next morning, Los Angeles woke beneath a clear, endless sky that seemed to stretch every possibility wide open. Sandra Bullock, however, felt a storm inside her chest that no sunshine could calm. She sat on her porch steps, the paper star Keanu had given her resting in her palm. Its edges were soft now, damp from the rain and warm from her touch. She whispered, almost to herself, "Today can't be another day of silence." Across the city, Keanu Reeves prepared breakfast in his quiet kitchen. He cracked eggs into a pan, but his mind was far away. The memory of Sandra's hand gripping his sleeve on that muddy trail kept flashing before him. He replayed the sound of her laugh as they'd sipped coffee on the truck's tailgate, the way her eyes had softened when she held the baby. A man known for patience felt an unfamiliar urgency. It was as if the universe was giving him hints, and he couldn't ignore them any longer. A sudden hook pulled viewers in. A viral video began spreading online. A volunteer had posted footage of the rescue, showing Sandra and Keanu leading families across the muddy path. The clip was raw, shaky, and emotional. Millions watched, commenting on their bravery, their teamwork, and the unmistakable tenderness in the way they looked at each other. Hashtags like "That Are Quiet Love" and "Hope in Hollywood" began trending. Strangers across the world started rooting for them, even as they themselves still hovered on the edge of confession. Sandra's phone buzzed non-stop, friends teasing her, fans sending hearts, even Lily messaging, "The world is cheering for you too." Sandra smiled at the support but also felt pressure mounting. She didn't want their story to become a spectacle. She wanted it to be honest, untainted by the noise of social media. Keanu's agent called, jokingly asking if he had plans to make it official after such a heroic performance. Keanu laughed softly but didn't answer. Deep down, he knew this wasn't about a headline. This was about a woman who had unknowingly shaped his life for decades. By late afternoon, the two were set to attend a small follow-up meeting for the charity. The organizers wanted to discuss the next phase of relief efforts, and both Keanu and Sandra had promised to attend. As Sandra dressed, she chose something simple, a soft gray sweater and jeans. She wanted to be herself, not a movie star. She slipped the paper star into her pocket, feeling its familiar weight as a reminder of her promise to speak. Keanu arrived at the venue first, a quiet community hall. He helped set up chairs and greeted volunteers. When Sandra walked in, sunlight poured through the tall windows behind her, catching the rainwater still clinging to her hair. Keanu's breath caught for a moment. He masked it with a smile, but the audience could see his heart skip. The meeting began, but outside, clouds began to gather again, unexpected for the forecast. A volunteer nervously mentioned that some supplies were stored in an older warehouse down the street that might leak if another downpour hit. Without hesitation, Keanu volunteered to help secure it. Sandra spoke up immediately. "I'll come too." Inside the warehouse, dust hung in the air like faded memories. Wooden crates lined the walls and old tools clinked softly in the draft. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the building, creating a low, steady drumbeat of suspense. They worked quickly, stacking and covering supplies. Then a unique twist. As Keanu climbed a short ladder to adjust a tarp, a sudden clap of thunder startled a nearby stray cat. It darted across the floor, knocking over a loose crate. Sandra instinctively reached to steady the crate, but it tipped, scattering small boxes. Keanu climbed down quickly, helping her gather them. Their hands touched again, just a brief brush, but enough to make them both pause. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "It's just the thunder," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't, for a moment. They knelt on the dusty floor, boxes forgotten, staring at each other. Rain began to patter against the tin roof, growing steadier. Keanu took a deep breath. "Sandra, there's something I've wanted to say for a long time." But before he could finish, voices called from outside. Volunteers needed their help with a delivery truck stuck in the mud. The moment shattered again. Keanu closed his mouth, nodded, and offered his hand to help her up. She took it, her heart pounding. They rushed outside, helping push the truck free. The rain had become heavier, drenching them as they worked alongside volunteers. Laughter erupted when the truck finally moved, splattering mud across everyone's faces. Sandra and Keanu stood side by side, wet hair clinging to their cheeks, their laughter blending with the volunteers. As the evening wound down, the volunteers invited everyone to a nearby diner for warm soup. Sandra and Keanu joined, sitting across from each other at a small booth. The diner was cozy, the hum of conversation filling the space. A little girl at a nearby table approached shyly and handed Sandra a drawing, a picture of two people holding hands under a rainbow. "That's you and him," she said with a giggle, pointing at Keanu. The entire diner chuckled softly, but the moment felt sacred. Keanu studied the drawing for a long moment, his quiet smile revealing 1,000 unspoken feelings. Sandra's fingers brushed the edge of the paper and she met his gaze. After dinner, he offered to walk her to her car. The parking lot glistened with puddles under the streetlights. For a few steps, neither spoke. Then Keanu stopped, turning to her. The world seemed to hold its breath. "All day," he said softly. "It's felt like the world is telling us something." Her eyes searched his. Maybe it's been telling us for years. But just as the moment swelled, a volunteer called out, asking if either of them had a spare jacket for another worker. They both turned. The spell broken yet again. As she drove home later, Sandra rested the child's drawing on the passenger seat beside the paper star. She whispered, "Next time, I will not let the moment pass." Keanu returned to his quiet apartment, the rain easing outside. He placed his muddy boots by the door, sat on the edge of his couch, and whispered to himself, "Don't wait forever." He glanced out the window at the distant city lights, their glow reflecting the quiet hope in his eyes. The camera panned to the child's drawing in Sandra's car, then to the paper star on her nightstand, before fading to black. The suspense deepened, leaving viewers holding their breath for the confession that had yet to come. The sun rose over Los Angeles with a warmth that felt almost deliberate, as if the universe itself was preparing the stage for a long overdue truth. Sandra Bullock stood by her window, the child's drawing and the paper star side by side on her table. She traced a finger over the crayon lines of two people under a rainbow and whispered, "No more running." Across the city, Keanu Reeves brewed a pot of coffee in his quiet apartment. He glanced at his phone. No missed calls from her. He looked at the paper star's twin in his pocket, the one she held for him last night, and said under his breath, "This is the day." A new hook pulled the audience in. Lily, the teenage fan who had unknowingly bound them closer, had arranged a surprise thank-you gathering at the restored community center. She had invited families, volunteers, and, without telling them, both Keanu and Sandra. Late that afternoon, Sandra drove to the center, unaware that Keanu was already there helping hang string lights. When she walked in, laughter and music filled the hall. Lily spotted her and ran over, hugging her tight. "You didn't know, did you?" Lily said with a grin. "We wanted to thank you and him," she pointed across the room. Sandra followed her finger and found Keanu standing near the stage, hands in his pockets. Watching her with that familiar quiet smile, the families they had rescued were there. The mother with the baby, the elderly men, the little girl with the bright eyes. One by one, they shared short stories of hope and gratitude. When the mother spoke, her voice trembled. "That night in the rain, you two reminded us that kindness still saves lives." The applause that followed wasn't loud or showy. It was warm, deep, and lingering. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Keanu and saw his eyes glistening. Another twist came when the little girl toddled to the front, holding a new paper star she had made. "This is for you," she said, offering it to Keanu and Sandra together. "So you don't get lost in the dark." The audience went quiet. Keanu crouched to accept it, but instead of taking it alone, he reached for Sandra's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always belonged that way. The hall seemed to fade, the laughter, the lights, the noise, all of it receded as they stood holding the fragile star. Keanu's voice was steady but soft, the kind of voice that can steady a heart. "Sandra, I've waited years, afraid to ruin what we had. But every storm, every rescue, every small moment has been telling me the same thing." He took a deep breath. "I love you." For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper, but strong enough for the universe to hear. "Keanu, I've loved you quietly for so long. I thought if I kept it silent, I wouldn't lose you. But I was wrong. Love isn't meant to be silent." A soft gasp rippled through the hall. Lily clapped her hands over her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks. The little girl beamed. Keanu reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from Sandra's face. "You didn't lose me," he said. "You found me." They embraced. Not the kind of embrace for cameras or headlines, but the kind that feels like a promise, kept after years of waiting. Applause swelled gently around them, not as a spectacle, but as a shared exhale of joy. Later, as the gathering wound down, Keanu and Sandra stepped outside into the cool evening. String lights glowed behind them and distant laughter floated through the air. The city skyline shimmered, and above it all stars pricked the sky. Real ones this time, not paper. They walked quietly to her car, fingers still linked. "Do you think the world will make a big deal out of this?" Sandra asked with a small laugh. "Let them," Keanu said, smiling. "We know the truth. It started with kindness, not headlines." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And it started long before last night." He kissed the top of her head, gentle and unhurried. "It started the moment I realized you make every storm worth walking through." As they drove off together, the camera lingered on the paper star taped to the community center door. Children's laughter echoed faintly, and the rainbow from the drawing seemed almost real in the twilight sky. The story closed not with grand spectacle, but with quiet certainty. Two hearts that had circled each other for years had finally spoken, proving that even in a noisy world, love whispered with kindness can move mountains.